The Volanthi exploration cruiser moved through the empty darkness of space, like a silver fish swimming through an endless ocean. And Commander Thyra stood at the observation window with all four of her eyes fixed on the scanner display in front of her. She had been exploring the Corvin expanse for nearly 2 cycles now, and in all that time she had found nothing but dead rocks and empty void, which made the sudden alert from the sensor array all the more surprising. "Commander, we have detected an anomaly at bearing 739, the sensor officer announced, his voice carrying a note of confusion that made Thyra turn away from the window. She walked across the bridge with the fluid grace of her species, her long robes trailing behind her as she approached the main display. And what she saw there made her pause in genuine surprise. A vessel hung in the darkness ahead of them, tumbling slowly end over end like a creature that had died in the water and was now drifting with the current. And even from this distance, she could tell that it was unlike anything she had ever seen before. The ship was massive and brutal in its design, with sharp angles and flat surfaces that seemed to reject every principle of elegant construction that the galactic community held dear. And Thyra found herself both fascinated and disturbed by its appearance. "What species does it belong to?" she asked, and her science officer Nick slithered forward on his many tentacles to examine the readings more closely. Nyx was a Kethrani, a species known throughout the galaxy for their brilliant minds and their cautious nature. And the way his tentacles were coiling and uncoiling told Thyra that he was deeply unsettled by what he was seeing. "I cannot identify it, Commander," he admitted, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like fear. "The hull composition is unlike anything in our database, and the design matches no known civilization." Thyra ordered the ship to move closer, and as they approached the drifting vessel, more details became visible on the enhanced display. The ship was covered in thick metal plating that looked like armor, and she could see what appeared to be weapon systems mounted on the exterior hull, which was something that civilized species had stopped doing. Thousands of years ago, there were markings on the side of the vessel, strange geometric symbols that their translation software could not decode. And beside them was an image that showed a blue and green sphere that might have been a planet. "Run a full scan of the interior," Thyra commanded, and Nyx complied with obvious reluctance. The results came back within moments, and when Nyx read them aloud, his voice had dropped to barely more than a whisper. "Commander, the atmospheric readings from inside that vessel are extremely concerning," he said, and his tentacles had gone completely still. "The pressure is at 101 kilopascals, which is nearly double what most species can tolerate comfortably." Thyra felt a chill run through her body, but she gestured for him to continue. "The atmosphere is composed of 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen," Nyx continued. And now several other crew members had turned to listen with expressions of growing horror on their faces. There are also trace amounts of argon and carbon dioxide, as well as water vapor suspended directly in the air. "That is a Class-15 Deathworld atmosphere," the medical officer said from across the bridge, and her voice was filled with disbelief. Nothing in the galactic community could survive in conditions like those for more than a few minutes. Thyra knew this was true, because she had studied the classification system for planetary environments during her training. And Class-15 was the highest danger rating that existed worlds. With that classification were places where the very air was poison, where the gravity crushed bones and the radiation from the local star caused cells to mutate and die, and no sane species would ever attempt to colonize such a place. Yet here was a ship that had clearly been built by creatures who breathed that toxic atmosphere as easily as she breathed the gentle mix of gases on her own homeworld. "Could the readings be wrong?" she asked, but she already knew the answer. "I have checked them 3 times, Nyx replied. "The readings are accurate, and there is something else you should know," He manipulated the display to show a new set of data, and Thyra leaned forward to examine it more closely. The ship still has power, Nix explained. It is minimal, but there are systems running inside that vessel, and the energy signature suggests that some kind of life support is still functioning. After how long? Thyra asked Nix, checked his calculations, and then looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Based on the decay patterns of certain radioactive elements in the hull and the drift trajectory, I estimate that this ship has been floating in this region of space for approximately 340 standard years. The bridge fell completely silent as everyone absorbed this information. 340 years was a long time even by galactic standards, and the idea that any ship could still have functioning systems after drifting for so long was remarkable, but there was another possibility that Thyra did not want to consider. A possibility that made her heart beat faster with a mixture of fear and excitement. Nix, are there any life signs aboard that vessel? She asked. The science officer hesitated for a long moment before answering, and when he did speak, his voice was barely audible. There are 3 biosignatures in what appears to be the medical bay, he said. They are faint and extremely slow, which suggests some form of suspended animation. But Commander, whatever is in those pods is still alive. Thyra stared at the image of the drifting ship and felt the weight of a decision settling onto her shoulders. Every instinct she had was telling her to turn around and leave this place, to report the finding to the Galactic Council and let someone else deal with whatever horror was sleeping inside that metal coffin. But she was an explorer, and explorers did not run from mysteries. Prepare a salvage team, she ordered, and her voice did not waver even though her hands were trembling. Full hazmat protocols, Class 7 suits at minimum, and I want everyone armed. As her crew rushed to obey, Thyra looked once more at the strange vessel hanging in the darkness. She did not know what they would find inside, but she had the feeling that whatever it was would change everything the galactic community thought it knew about the universe. She just hoped they would all survive long enough to report it. The salvage shuttle detached from the Volanti cruiser and moved slowly toward the drifting alien vessel, and inside the small craft 6 crew members sat in tense silence as they watched their destination grow larger through the forward. Viewport engineer Kethvol checked his hazmat suit for the 3rd time, running his clawed fingers over every seal and connection to make sure nothing was loose, because he knew that a single failure could mean death in the toxic atmosphere that waited for them. Beside him sat Security Officer Vion, a massive Dorvathi whose thick scales were hidden beneath layers of protective equipment, and even he looked nervous as the shuttle approached the mysterious ship. Remember your training. Commander Thyra's voice came through their communicators. Document everything you find, and do not touch anything unless you are certain it is safe. Kethvol wanted to laugh at that instruction, because nothing about this mission felt safe. But he kept his thoughts to himself as the shuttle pilot maneuvered them toward what appeared to be an airlock on the side of the alien vessel. The docking procedure was difficult because the other ship's systems were not compatible with their own. But after several minutes of careful work, the shuttle's cutting tools had created an opening large enough for them to pass through. The airlock beyond was dark and cold, and Kethvol activated the lights on his helmet as he pulled himself through the breach and into the unknown vessel. The first thing he noticed was how heavy everything felt, and he realized that the artificial gravity on this ship was much stronger than what he was used to, which made every movement require extra effort. The gravity is intense, he reported back to the cruiser. I estimate it is at least 1.3 times standard, maybe more. That matches the expected conditions for a Class-15 Deathworld species. Nix's voice replied, be very careful, because prolonged exposure to that level of gravitational stress could cause serious damage to your bodies. Keth Volume moved deeper into the ship with his team following close behind. And what they found in the corridors made them stop and stare in confused amazement. The walls were covered with printed documents and images, held in place by some kind of adhesive. And the pictures showed bipedal creatures with soft pink or brown skin and small round eyes that faced forward in a way that made Kethvol's instincts scream danger. Are those the creatures who built this ship? Bjorn asked, and his voice was tight with barely controlled fear. I believe so, Kethvolume replied. Notice how the eyes are positioned at the front of the head rather than on the sides, which indicates a predator species that evolved to hunt other living things. The team continued through the corridors, and everywhere they looked, they found more evidence of the strange creatures who had once lived here. There were living plants growing in small containers, somehow still alive after centuries of neglect. And Kethvolume could not understand how any form of vegetation could survive in an atmosphere that was 21% oxygen. There were personal items scattered on the floor, including what appeared to be clothing and tools and small rectangular devices that might have been primitive data storage units, and there was damage everywhere. Evidence of some catastrophe that had struck this vessel. Long ago, Kthvolume stopped at a section of hull that had clearly been repaired, and he ran his scanner over the crude metal patches that had been welded into place over what must have been a serious breach. Commander, you need to hear this, he said into his communicator. These repairs were done manually, by hand, and based on the positioning, I believe they were done from the outside. That is not possible, Tyler replied. No one could perform welding operations in the vacuum of space without automated equipment. I am looking at the evidence, Kethvolume insisted. Someone went outside this ship, in open space, and welded these patches into place while the vessel was still in flight. He touched the rough surface of the repair work and tried to imagine what kind of creature would be capable of such a thing. And he found that he did not want to know. The team pressed on toward the medical bay that the sensors had identified. And with each step, the feeling of unease grew stronger. Finally, they reached a large door that was sealed shut, and Bjorn had to use his considerable strength to force it open against the resistance of whatever mechanism was. Holding it closed, the room beyond was lit by a dim red glow that came from emergency lighting strips on the ceiling. And in the center of the space stood 3 large pods that hummed with the sound of active machinery. Kethvolume approached the nearest pod and wiped away the layer of frost that covered the transparent panel on its front. And what he saw inside made him take several rapid steps backward. The creature in the pod was tall and muscular, with pale skin and dark hair on the top of its head. And even in its frozen sleep, it radiated a sense of danger that made every survival instinct in Kethvol's body activate at once. I found them, he whispered into his communicator. 3 pods, 3 occupants, and commander. These things are terrifying. He could hear Thyra asking questions, but his attention was fixed on the status display attached to the pod, which was showing readings he could not fully understand. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. One of the lights on the display had just changed from blue to green, and the humming sound from the pod was getting louder. The pod is activating, he said, and now his voice was rising with panic. I did not touch anything, but the pod is starting an awakening cycle. Get out of there immediately, Thyra commanded. But before anyone could move, the pod made a loud hissing sound and the front panel began to open. Mist poured out from inside the pod, and through the cloud of frozen vapor, Kethvolume could see the creature beginning to move. Its eyes opened first, and they were small and dark and filled with an intensity that no Valanthi had ever seen in another living being. Then the creature sat up, and its movements were fast and fluid in a way that spoke of muscles designed for violence. It looked around the room with those predator eyes, And when its gaze landed on the salvage team, it made a sound that was low and rumbling and full of threat. Keth Volume found that he could not move, could not speak, could not do anything except stare at this nightmare that had just woken up in front of him. Creature climbed out of the pod and stood at its full height, which was taller than any member of the salvage team. And it looked at each of them in turn, as if it was deciding which one to kill first. Then it did something that no one expected it. Raised its hands with the palms facing outward. And it spoke in a voice that was harsh, but somehow also gentle. The translation software struggled with the unfamiliar sounds. But finally it produced words that everyone could understand. "We come in peace," the creature said. "Please, do not be afraid." And despite everything that logic and instinct were telling him, Keth Volume found that he almost believed it. The creature from the pod stood in the dim red light of the medical bay, and every member of the salvage team had their weapons raised and pointed at its chest. Keth Volume could see that it was breathing heavily, its chest rising and falling as it drew the toxic oxygen atmosphere directly into its body without any protection at all. And he found himself wondering how any living thing could survive doing that. "Stay back," Security Officer Vern commanded, and his voice was shaking despite his efforts to sound brave. "Do not move or we will be forced to defend ourselves." The creature tilted its head to one side in a gesture that might have meant confusion, and then it slowly lowered itself into a sitting position on the edge of the pod, kept its hands visible the entire time. And Keth Volume realized that it was trying very hard not to appear threatening, which seemed strange for something that looked so obviously dangerous. "My name is Marcus Cole," the creature said. And the translation software was working better now that it had more samples of the language to analyze. "I am the commander of this vessel, and I mean you no harm." Before anyone could respond, the second pod began its awakening cycle, and another creature emerged from the mist with movements that were just as quick and precise as the first. This one was smaller than Marcus Cole, with darker skin and long black hair that was tied back behind its head. And Keth Volume noticed immediately that there was something wrong with it. A massive wound ran across its torso, a jagged line of damaged flesh that had been sealed with some kind of chemical adhesive and held together with metal staples that had been driven directly through the skin. The creature should have been dead, or at least unconscious from pain, but instead it stood up and walked over to Marcus Cole as if the injury was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Lieutenant Chum," Marcus Cole said, and there was relief in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck and then frozen for a few centuries," Lieutenant Chen replied. And then she made a strange sound that the translation software could not identify. Marcus Cole made the same sound. And Keth Volume realized with shock that they were laughing. These creatures, who had just woken up from centuries of frozen sleep in a damaged ship surrounded by armed aliens, were laughing as if they had just heard a funny joke. "Are you seeing this?" He whispered into his communicator, and he could hear Commander Thylorus breathing on the other end of the connection. "I'm monitoring everything through your helmet cameras," she replied, and her voice was filled with disbelief. "That creature has a wound that would kill any species in the galactic community, but it is walking and talking as if nothing is wrong." The third pod opened, and the final creature emerged. This one was older than the others, with gray hair and lines on its face that suggested many years of life. And it moved more slowly than its companions, but with no less confidence. "Dr. Yusuf," Marcus Cole said, "welcome back to the land of the living. I would say it is good to be back, but I appear to have woken up to a room full of aliens pointing guns at us," Dr. Yusuf replied. And he looked at the salvage team with an expression that seemed more curious than afraid. "Perhaps someone could explain what is happening." Marcus Cole turned back to face the Volante crew, and he raised his hands again in that gesture of peace. "I understand that our appearance must be frightening to you," he said, and his voice was calm and measured. "We are humans from a planet called Earth, and we were traveling to establish a colony on a distant world when our ship was damaged." He gestured around at the medical bay and the pods that had kept them alive. "Many of our people died." He continued, and now there was sadness in his voice. "We did everything we could to survive. But in the end, only 3 of us made it into the cryopods before the power failed." HFY found himself lowering his weapon slightly, because there was something in the creature's voice that spoke of genuine grief and loss. "We have been searching for a long time," Marcus Cole said. "We knew that we were not alone in the universe, and we hoped that one day we would find others who could help us." He took a step forward, and Viarn immediately raised his weapon again. "Please," Marcus Cole said. And now his voice was almost pleading. "We have been alone in the dark for so long, and we only want to know if there is anyone out there who might be willing to be our friend." For a long moment, no one spoke, and the only sound was the humming of the cryopods and the breathing of the 3 humans. Then, Commander Thaura's voice came through the communicator, and what she said surprised everyone on the salvage team. "Bring them back to the cruiser," she ordered. "Full quarantine protocols, but treat them as guests rather than prisoners." "Commander, are you certain that is wise?" Viarn asked, and his voice was tight with concern. "No," Thaura admitted. "But these creatures have been drifting in space for over 300 years, waiting for someone to find them, and I believe they deserve a chance to tell their story." HFY looked at Marcus Cole, and the human looked back at him with those strange forward-facing eyes. "Thank you," Marcus Cole said, and he extended one of his hands toward HFY in a gesture that the engineer did not understand. "It is a greeting among my people," Marcus Cole explained when he saw the confusion. "You take my hand in yours, and we shake them together. And it means that we are meeting as equals who wish each other no harm." HFY hesitated for a moment, and then he reached out with his own clawed hand and allowed the human to wrap his soft fingers around it. The grip was strong, much stronger than HFY had expected, but it was also gentle and controlled. "I am Engineer HFY," he said, "and I think that you and I have much to discuss." Marcus Cole smiled, and although the expression showed all of his teeth in a way that made HFY's instincts scream danger, there was something warm and genuine about it. "We have all the time in the universe," the human replied, "and I have a feeling that this is the beginning of something wonderful." As the salvage team led the 3 humans back toward the shuttle, HFY found himself thinking about everything he had learned about Class-15 Deathworlds and the creatures that might evolve on them. Official documentation said that such beings would be monsters, savage predators incapable of civilization or cooperation. But looking at Marcus Cole and his companions, HFY was beginning to wonder if the official documentation might be wrong about a great many things. The conference room on the Volante cruiser had been modified to accommodate the 3 human guests, with the gravity reduced slightly and the atmospheric mix adjusted to something that both species could tolerate. Commander Thaura sat at one end of the long table, and Marcus Cole sat at the other, and between them were gathered the senior officers of the ship, along with Lieutenant Chen and Dr. Yusuf. "I must admit that I have many questions," Thaura said, and she was studying the humans with all 4 of her eyes. "Your species is not in our database, which means you have had no contact with the galactic community before now." "We did not even know that there was a galactic community," Marcus Cole replied, and there was a note of wonder in his voice. "When we left Earth, we believed that we might be the only intelligent life in the universe." Nix leaned forward with obvious curiosity, and his tentacles were moving in the patterns that indicated intense interest. "Your homeworld is classified as a Class-15 Deathworld," he said. "Can you tell us what conditions are like there?" Marcus Cole exchanged a glance with his companions, and Dr. Yusuf let out a short laugh. "It depends on what you mean by conditions. the doctor said. Earth is a beautiful world with oceans and forests and mountains that reach up into the sky, but it is also a world that is constantly trying to kill us, Lieutenant Chun added. And she seemed almost proud of this fact. We have extreme temperatures that range from freezing cold to burning hot, storms that can destroy entire cities, and earthquakes that can collapse buildings in seconds. Do not forget the volcanoes, Marcus Cole said, and the tsunamis, and the droughts, and the floods, and the diseases that have wiped out millions of our people throughout history. Thalra felt her scales tighten with discomfort as she listened to this casual description of horrors. How did your species survive long enough to develop technology? She asked, and she genuinely could not understand how any civilization could emerge from such conditions. We adapted, Marcus Cole said simply. We learned to build shelters that could withstand the storms. And we developed medicine to fight the diseases. And we created tools that allowed us to grow food even in the harshest environments. He paused and looked down at the table for a moment before continuing. And when we could not adapt, we endured, he said. We lost many people along the way. But those who survived became stronger and smarter and more determined to keep going. Thalra wanted to ask more questions about Earth, but she knew that there was a more pressing matter to discuss. Your ship, she said. What happened to it? The mood in the room changed immediately, and she could see the weight of memory settling onto the shoulders of all three humans. The Endurance was a colony ship, Marcus Cole began, and his voice had become quiet and heavy. We were carrying 200 people to a star system that our astronomers had identified as potentially habitable. We did not have faster-than-light technology, Dr. Yusuf explained. So our journey was going to take generations, with most of the colonists spending the voyage in cryosleep while a small crew kept the ship running. We had been traveling for almost 50 years when the accident happened, Lieutenant Chun said, and her hand moved unconsciously to the wound on her torso. A micrometeorite, no bigger than a grain of sand, struck the ship at a significant fraction of light speed. She closed her eyes as if she was reliving the moment in her mind. The impact punched a hole through 3 decks and damaged the main reactor. She continued. Within minutes, we had lost life support and half the ship, and the cryopods started failing one after another. I was in the medical bay when the breach happened, Dr. Yusuf said, and his voice was steady, but Thalra could hear the pain beneath the surface. I watched as dozens of colonists died in their pods because we could not get power to them fast enough. Marcus Cole took over the story, and his words painted a picture of desperate heroism that made Thalra's hearts ache. We did everything we could, he said. Crew members sealed breaches with their own bodies, holding back the vacuum while others welded patches into place behind them. Several people died that way, Lieutenant Chen added. They knew they would not survive, but they held on anyway so that others could live. The reactor was the worst problem, Marcus Cole continued. It was going to explode and take the entire ship with it. So our chief engineer volunteered to go in and try to stabilize it. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Her name was Sarah Park, and she absorbed enough radiation to kill a person 10 times over. But she kept working for 6 hours until she managed to shut down the reactor. She died with her hands still on the controls, Dr. Yusuf said quietly. And because of her sacrifice, we were able to survive long enough to eject the reactor core and continue on emergency power. The room was silent as the Volanti crew absorbed this information. Tilla tried to imagine what it would be like to work for 6 hours, while your body was being destroyed by radiation. To know that every minute you continued was another minute of agony. And she found that she could not comprehend that level of courage. In the end, only 47 of the original 200 colonists survived the initial disaster, Marcus Cole said. And then we had to figure out how to keep going with half our systems destroyed and no hope of rescue. We lasted for another 3 months on emergency power, Lieutenant Chun said, rationing oxygen until people passed out, recycling water until it barely deserved the name, and making repairs with whatever materials we could salvage. Some of those repairs used parts from our dead, Dr. Yusuf admitted, and there was shame in his voice. The bones of our friends became structural supports, because we had nothing else. When the last of the power finally failed, there was only enough reserve in the cryopods for 3 people. Marcus Cole finished. The remaining survivors voted, and they chose us to be the ones who would sleep and hope that someone would find us. He looked up at Tyra, and his eyes were shining with tears that did not fall. They stayed awake on a dying ship so that we could have a chance at life, he said. They died alone in the dark, one by one, and the last thing they did was point our ship toward the nearest star system in the hope that someone might be there. Thyra found that she could not speak, because her throat was tight with an emotion she had never felt before these creatures. These humans from a world of death and danger had shown more courage and sacrifice in their darkest hour than any species she had ever encountered. You drifted for 340 years, she finally managed to say. All that time, frozen and alone, not knowing if he would ever wake up. Marcus Cole smiled. And it was a sad smile, but also a hopeful one. We had faith, he said. Faith that the universe was not empty, and that somewhere out there someone would find us. He reached across the table and placed his hand palm down on the surface. And after a moment of hesitation, Thyra placed her own hand beside it. And here you are, Marcus Cole said softly. Our hope was not in vain. Thyra looked at this strange creature from a Deathworld. This survivor who had lost everything and still believed in the goodness of the universe. And she made a decision. We're going to take you home, she said. Not to Earth, because we do not know where that is, but to the heart of the galactic community. She straightened in her seat and spoke with the full authority of her rank. And I am going to make sure that everyone in the galaxy knows your story, so that they understand exactly what kind of people humans really are. For the first time since waking up, Marcus Cole smiled with genuine joy, and the expression transformed his predator face into something almost beautiful. Thank you, he said, and the words carried the weight of 340 years of hope finally fulfilled. The Galactic Council chamber was the largest enclosed space that Marcus Cole had ever seen. A vast dome of shimmering crystal that housed representatives from over 1,000 different species. He stood at the entrance to the speaking platform with Lieutenant Chun and Dr. Yusuf beside him. And for a moment, the sheer scale of what he was about to do made him hesitate. Are you ready for this? Chun asked quietly, and her voice was steady despite the bandages still visible beneath her formal clothing. No, Marcus admitted. But when has that ever stopped us? The 3 humans walked forward onto the platform, and the murmur of countless alien voices fell. Silent as every eye and sensor and other perceptive organ in the chamber turned to focus on them, Commander Thyra had prepared them for this moment as best she could during the journey to the Council homeworld. But nothing could have truly readied Marcus for the experience of being stared at by thousands of beings who viewed his species as something between a mystery and a threat. The Counselor Prime was a being of crystalline elegance named Yevthos, and she rose from her position at the center of the highest tier to address the chamber. We have called this emergency session to discuss a matter of unprecedented importance, she announced, and her voice resonated through the dome like music. For the first time in recorded history, we have made contact with a species from a Class-15 Deathworld. The murmur returned, louder now and tinged with obvious fear, and Marcus could see delegates on all sides shifting nervously in their seats. The species calls themselves humans, Counselor Yevthos continued, and they come from a world called Earth. which is located in an unexplored region of the galaxy that we have traditionally avoided due to the dangerous nature of the star systems there. She turned her crystalline gaze toward Marcus, and there was no warmth in her expression. "Commander Marcus Cole," she said, and her voice carried a challenge. "You stand before the Galactic Council as the representative of your people, and we have questions that demand answers." Marcus stepped forward and placed his hands behind his back in a posture of formal attention that felt natural after decades of military service. "I am ready to answer whatever you wish to ask," he replied, and his voice was calm and clear despite the fear that churned in his stomach. "Your species evolved on a world where the atmosphere would poison most life forms," Yevthos said, "where the gravity would crush bones and the radiation would destroy cells, and where every aspect of the environment seems designed to cause death." She paused, and the chamber was absolutely silent. "Your biology is built for violence," she continued, "with forward-facing predator eyes and bodies designed for speed and power. And your history, as described by Commander Thalra, is filled with war and conflict and destruction." Marcus felt Chun tense beside him, but he placed a hand on her arm to keep her calm. "Given all of this," Counselor Yevthos concluded, "there was one reason why we should not quarantine your species forever and ensure that you never have the opportunity to threaten the peace we have built." The challenge hung in the air, and Marcus knew that his response in this moment would determine the future of humanity in the galaxy. Looked around the chamber at the thousands of alien faces watching him, and he thought about everything his people had been through to reach this moment. He thought about Sarah, part dying with her hands on the reactor controls, and about the colonists who had voted to let him sleep while they stayed awake to die. He thought about the ice ages his ancestors had survived, and the plagues that had killed millions but never defeated them, and the wars they had fought against each other before finally learning that cooperation was better than conflict. He thought about Earth, beautiful and terrible, and home, and then he spoke. "You are right about many things," he began, and his voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "We evolved on a dangerous world, and we are built for survival in ways that I understand must be frightening to you." He took a step forward, and some of the delegates flinched at the movement. "We have fought wars against each other," he admitted. "We have done terrible things in the name of survival and power and fear, and our history is not always something we are proud of." He paused, and when he continued his voice was softer but no less strong. "But we have also loved," he said. "We have created art and music and poetry that celebrates the beauty of existence. And we have sacrificed our lives for each other in moments of crisis." He gestured toward Chun with her still healing wound, and toward Dr. Yusuf, who had watched so many die and kept fighting anyway. "My crew survived a disaster that killed most of our people," Marcus said, "and they did it not through violence, but through cooperation and courage and an unwillingness to surrender to despair." He looked directly at Counselor Yevthos, and his gaze was steady and unafraid. "We have been alone for a very long time," he said. "Our entire existence as a species has been a struggle against a universe that seemed designed to destroy us. And we have spent our whole history wondering if there was anyone else out there." His voice grew stronger, and the words came from somewhere deep in his heart. "We did not come here to make enemies," he declared. "We did not cross the endless darkness of space so that we could threaten or harm anyone. And if that was our intention, we would not have put ourselves at your mercy like this." He spread his arms wide in a gesture of openness. "We came here because we hoped to find friends," Marcus said, "because after millions of years of fighting to survive, we finally wanted to find someone who would welcome us instead of trying to kill us." The chamber was silent, and Marcus could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on him from all sides. "You ask why you should not quarantine us forever," he said, "and I will give you my answer." He straightened to his full height, And his voice rang out like a bell. "Because we are survivors," he declared. "And survivors understand the value of community and cooperation better than anyone. Because we know what it means to face the darkness alone." He pointed toward the stars visible through the crystal dome above. "There are dangers out there that even your galactic community has not faced," he said. "And when those dangers come, you will want allies who know how to fight and endure and never give up." He lowered his hand and spoke with quiet intensity. "We have plenty of fight left in us," Marcus said. "But we would rather share a meal than throw a punch. And we would rather build bridges than burn them." He met Counselor Yevthos' gaze one final time. "Give us a chance," he said. "Let us prove that we can be more than the sum of our dangerous parts. And I promise you that humanity will stand with the galactic community as friends and allies for as long as the stars continue to burn." The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and Marcus could hear his own heart beating in his chest. Then, somewhere in the chamber, someone began to applaud. It was a Volanti delegate, and Marcus recognized Commander Theora standing beside them in the observers' gallery. Another delegate joined the applause, and then another, and soon the sound was spreading through the chamber like a wave counselor. Yevthos watched as more and more species added their voices to the growing chorus of approval. And slowly the rigid lines of her crystalline face softened into something that might have been a smile. "It appears," she said, and her voice cut through the noise of the chamber, "that the council has already begun to form an opinion." She descended from her platform and walked toward Marcus. And with each step she took, the applause grew louder. When she reached him, she extended one of her crystalline limbs. And Marcus understood immediately what she was doing. He took her hand in his and shook it firmly. And the gesture sent a ripple of surprise and approval through the watching delegates. "Welcome to the galactic community, Commander Cole," Counselor Yevthos said. "I suspect that things are going to be very different from now on," Marcus smiled, showing his teeth in a way that no longer seemed to frighten the aliens around him. "Different can be good," he replied. "And I have a feeling that this is the beginning of something wonderful." Behind him, Chun and Yusuf were smiling too. And in the observers' gallery, Commander Dara felt something she had never expected to feel toward a Deathworld species. She felt hope, and as the applause continued to fill the chamber, she knew that humanity had finally found what they had been searching for across all those centuries of darkness. They had found a home among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same again.